Hello, I'm Amanda Moore. I'm the director of the Clearinghouse community. Welcome to the Advocacy Exchange for August 2018. The Advocacy Exchange is our monthly conversation with advocates advancing change. Both the Advocacy Exchange and the Clearinghouse community are brought to you by the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, a national leader in advancing justice and opportunity. Today I'm joined by two guests, Kevin de Liban and Søren Rasmussen. Kevin is the Economic Justice Practice Group leader at Legal Aid of Arkansas, and he joins us today from West Memphis, Arkansas. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Amanda. Hi, everybody.
And I'm also joined today by Søren Rasmussen. Søren is the Media Relations Manager at Voices for Civil Justice, which is dedicated to helping the civil legal aid community with messaging, communications, and media. And he joins us today from Washington, D.C. Hi, Søren.
Hi, Amanda. Hi, everybody. And from the swamp, Harley, and hopefully not too stressful Wednesday.
Excellent. Yes, straight from the heart of the swamp. Glad you could be with us. Well, Kevin and Søren wrote our current article that's on the Clearinghouse. It's called Narrating Justice, Client-Centered Media Advocacy. It can be found on the Clearinghouse community, which is at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. And the article describes how civil legal aid programs, even those funded by the Legal Services Corporation, can engage in client-centered media advocacy. It's got tips and it's got a great case study from Arkansas, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into that, I want to tell you how you can be part of the conversation. So those of you who are watching us live, you're watching through the Shriver Center's YouTube channel, you'll see that there's an option for a live chat. And I see that lots of you have already found that, so that's wonderful. Thanks for tuning in today. We've got folks in Arkansas, Connecticut, Virginia, Maine, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Tennessee. So thanks for letting us hear from you. If you want to go ahead and try out the live chat, please do. You can just send us your name and where you're watching. We would love to hear from you. And as we're talking, feel free to submit questions or comments for Kevin and Søren. Now, everyone who registered for today's program is going to receive an email in the next couple of days that will contain a link to a recording of today's conversation, as well as a link to Kevin and Søren's article. It will also contain a link to register for the next Advocacy Exchange. Let's go ahead and get started and talk about client-centered media advocacy. Kevin, I'll start with you. What does that mean? What do you mean by that term, client-centered media advocacy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the client-centered portion is the most important, and in everything we do as legal aid attorneys, our focus should be on how do we add some meaningful value to clients' lives, right? So whether it's directly through some sort of legal advocacy, whether it's kind of in the informal counseling role that some of us take on when appropriate, or whether it's that idea of being able to translate client stories and experiences into something that's helpful to somebody else, right? Whether it's other clients, members of the wider public, the media, other legal aid advocates, whoever that might be, making sure that we are bringing value to clients' lives in all the ways possible. And media advocacy is one way that we can do that.
Excellent. Well, Søren, why would a legal aid program want to open itself and its clients up to public scrutiny? Isn't that kind of dangerous in today's media world?
Well, I would argue it's too risky not to do it. I mean, you're already under scrutiny, both locally and nationally, and narratives and stories about your clients, about the problems they have every day, about the issues that you're working on. I mean, they're already being told. I mean, how many times have you seen a segment on television or read an article or an op-ed and kind of just either gone from being mildly frustrated to banging your fist against the wall just because it's either wrong or because it's not told in the way that you know to be true? I bet Kevin is smiling, and I bet he can tell it as well. Well, it's because somebody else is telling, your story and your side of the story, and you're not. And so there's really no reason not to at least do it in some kind of way. I'm not saying go out there guns a-blazing and go Michael Avenatti style and want to be on every single story that you don't have expertise in. It's of course important to be strategic and know which audience you're talking to and what it is you're trying to accomplish here. But it's there are way more upsides to being in the media and telling your stories from your perspective than not.
Well, I'll remind our viewers that we want to hear from you. So if you have questions about this, please feel free to submit those through the live chat. You can also email me if live chat isn't your thing. You can email me at Amanda Moore, Moore, at povertylaw.org. And I'll be sure to see your question that way as well. So I'm thinking more of these concerns that people might be thinking of. And your article takes a lot of those just head on and answers them. One of those that I thought was pretty compelling is this question of whether it's exploitative to put a client in front of the media at a time that's probably one of the client's hardest times in life. So Kevin, I'll turn to you with that. Is it exploitative to engage in this kind of work with the media?
Well, it all depends, I think, on how you do it, what your approach is. I mean, we always see here at Legal Aid of Arkansas, we try to see our clients as kind of partners in advocacy. And that means honoring their wishes, centering them and their desires. And so there's a way to do this and do media strategy where it isn't at all exploitative. It's talking to folks, seeing whether they think their stories, whether they're comfortable sharing their stories, making sure that they know that whether or not they say yes, they're going to get the same level of service, knowing that they can kind of pull their consent at any point and that you're going to honor that in any way, no matter how frustrating it might be or how much it might interrupt your own sort of strategy. So it doesn't have to be exploitative. And you definitely need to start off very early on, well before you actually want them to speak to the media or want them to do something, talking to them about this, seeing if they think that's a good idea, gauging their comfort levels, being responsive to their concerns, and so forth.
Great. Søren, our audience members, I imagine, have probably a pretty wide range of experience in dealing with the media. So some are probably just starting out with this, thinking about it. Others have probably already had some experience. Let's focus on the newbies for a minute. So for those who are just starting out, what should they do? What would be the first steps you would recommend for someone who is starting to think about maybe engaging in this type of client-centered media advocacy?
Yeah, I think it starts and it kind of builds up what Kevin just said. It starts by having, your own infrastructure, your own guidelines, your own set of rules, especially as it applies to clients, when you can pull the plug, what they are to expect, how there's a normal process to this, how, of course, that you will never let any media effort try to come in the way of what they're ultimately trying to achieve here. So it starts with like that sort of infrastructure, and that kind of has to go out to the entire organization as well. But on an individual level, you're talking about setting up a culture to actually succeed. So do you have internal guidelines for media in general? Do you have a supportive leadership that is on board, or how do you have to navigate that internally? Do you have a process to capture good stories? Do you know how to tell them? Do you have tools to work with reporters, like one-pagers or two-pagers, just with, just kind of a cheat sheet about how to, typically do's and don'ts to start with? Do you have an internal media list that sort of overlaps with your organizational or your litigation objectives? If you set that out from the beginning, at least, if you have that from the beginning, that's always a good start. And you kind of have to have that groundwork laid. It's at least that's what we recommend, that you have that groundwork laid until you start, jumping out and suddenly finding yourselves making mistakes that could easily have been avoided if you've, spent just an hour or two on the front end rather than suddenly figuring out, that's probably something we should have known from the beginning. It's kind of the same as with a reporter's mindset. I mean, research, and the same, I imagine, as you do cases. You wouldn't dare to go to trial without knowing what the facts and what sort of strategies or sort of questions the judge might ask, what the opposing counsel might say. So it's really all about research to start.
So you mentioned a lot of documents that people might want to have in place when they're starting out. I know if I were just starting out and I heard that list, I would think, I don't know how to create those. So are there resources people can go to find templates or talk to someone who can give guidance on those kind of foundational documents that people need to have?
Well, yeah, I certainly want to just shamelessly promote ourselves and what we do here at Voices. We do have some of these resources available to you. If not, we have created them along the way for local programs if they, ask us for it. We also have a discussion list where people from time to time ask other people across the legal aid community whether they have seen certain problems around media communications, and if they have, things like a client release form or one pager on how to engage with reporters, how to be on air as opposed to writing op-eds, as opposed to talking to a reporter on the phone. So those resources certainly exist, and if nothing else, I mean, Google's always your friend. And if you do have somebody who works in communications or journalism in your family or in your professional circle, just ask them. There's, of course, a somewhat of a different approach from reporter to reporter and from local media market to local media market. So anytime you can kind of feed off other people's knowledge too, that's something that tends to be forgotten in the age of Google, but is as important as ever, really.
Great. And so I'll note that in the follow-up email that we send out, we'll be sure to include Søren's contact information so you can get in touch with him and the staff at Voices for Civil Justice to get some of those samples. We've had a question come in from Sarah in New Hampshire. Sarah, I'm going to hold your question for just a minute because I think what I'm going to talk to Kevin about next might lead us into your question. So thank you, Søren, for telling us about sort of the entry level. Kevin, you and Legal Aid of Arkansas have done quite a bit of work with the media, with your clients. I want to hear a little bit about that. You go into, you tell a great case story in the article, so I encourage everyone to read that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience with the case that you talked about in the article, and some of the tips that you've learned as you've kind of gotten more experience working with clients and working with the media?
Sure, and I should note that we started off pretty much at beginner level. I mean, Legal Aid of Arkansas certainly had been in the press plenty of times before, usually through press releases or sometimes occasional one-off stories for some great victory we had or some really pressing issue that we were working with folks on. But in terms of anything sort of intentional, bigger picture with multiple episodes in it, we had not strategized at all there, and Søren and Voices were a huge help. In terms of this particular issue, it's a Medicaid issue. Basically, Medicaid will pay for a caregiver to come into somebody's home and provide a certain amount of what's called attendant care, help with activities of daily living, bathing, eating, cooking, these kinds of activities. For a long time, the state had used registered nurses to assess somebody and decide how many hours of care that they were going to receive, up to a maximum of 8 hours per day. What happened starting in January of 2016, the state switched to an algorithm that would determine the number of hours that somebody would receive. And there was no deviating from what the algorithm said. And really the best case scenario under the algorithm was for people to get 5.5 hours a day of care. And so for individuals with cerebral palsy, quadriplegia, multiple sclerosis, or just other various chronic ailments, that was a drastic cut, anywhere between 20 and 50% in the case of most of our clients. And not only was it a cut, it was a cut that left people lying in their own waste, left people without food, left people with no community contact, shut in, all these other really horrifying conditions and undignified conditions. So that's kind of where we started. And we knew the first way the story occurred to us was as benefit cuts to a really vulnerable population. We try to avoid the discourse about the most needy and all that stuff for various problems we can talk about later. But we saw it as, hey, this is benefits cuts for a vulnerable population with some interesting black box angle about the algorithm. But what we saw is as coverage on it intensified and as word of it spread, the algorithm itself kind of became the story, right? Is it appropriate for a government agency to use an algorithm to the exclusion of human judgment in determining these vital home care benefits? And then there was all of this stuff about the secrecy of the algorithm. And then once we figured out how the algorithm worked, how absurd the algorithm is, all these other things that kind of came and developed. And so that went hand in hand with litigation. And really, media became a way for us to augment our advocacy capabilities through litigation by helping spread the word so that folks who were affected would come to us, by putting the word out there about what the algorithm was doing and helping other people ask questions on their own, and then also giving this whole body of information out to the public so that our clients or other affected people could then have information that they could act on their own independently of us and become kind of self-advocates in a way that was really incredible to see and is still kind of ongoing.
Well, let me ask Sarah's question now. So Sarah says that their policy is generally to hold off on proactive media work until a case is completed. Any advice for evaluating when, whether, or how to do media advocacy during a case? So Kevin, what did you all do?
Yeah, this is something that is really controversial, I think, with lawyers generally, and in particular, I guess, in legal aid. Most of the time, the fears I hear that clients are going to say something wrong. And I just haven't found that to be a really valid concern when there's enough prep and when you have a sufficient number of clients. It seems all right, even if it's the clients in the litigation that are saying something, as long as they've been prepped all right. I think it's okay. There's some risk, right, because of what could come out in a deposition or contradictory testimony. But if you have clients who have the same issue as whatever you're litigating on, and they're not part of the litigation, and media makes sense in terms of getting other clients, helping inform the public about whatever's going on, or creating somehow indirectly favorable conditions for a good outcome, then I don't see any reason not to use media. But again, you have to have that strategic purpose in mind at the beginning. We're never out just hunting media for the limelight, right? We want it for something in particular.
Yeah, I think if I can jump in here too on that, is that there are certainly just as a matter of media, it becomes harder, to get in the media if a case is not ongoing, if it's already closed. So that's one smaller consideration. But there are certain ways of doing media that are more, that certainly can alleviate and talk to some of those concerns. If you know that there's a person you could absolutely not see going on television or on live radio, have them sit down with a reporter in a place where they're comfortable with you present, or have them write something like an essay or an op-ed and help edit that process. It's just making sure that their story is told in a way that maximizes their own control of that. That's another consideration to always think of. And I do think too, at least from what we're hearing, is that clients themselves will find that, or people just in general will find that incredibly powerful and incredibly empowering once they get the chance to do that. If you're really afraid too of a television interview, I know that Kevin and Legal Aid of Arkansas did as well, you do it on your own. Create a couple of videos and edit out all the stuff that's not supposed to be there. Pitch that into, or spread that on your own channels. And maybe even pitch it into certain local television stations or their social media managers. That might be something that's an alternative way to get in the media, but a way that certainly can have great success. In some local papers, they will have 30,000 subscribers, or they will have maybe a rating of 100,000 people watching, but their social media feed will have hundreds of thousands views over the course of a couple of months. So it's maybe even more valuable to you to use that specific platform, the added benefit that you get to control the narrative in a much more beneficial way.
We had a question posted about whether this will be recorded. It is being recorded and will be available later. Everyone who registered will get an email with a link to the recording and a link to Søren and Kevin's article. I'll remind our viewers that you can submit your questions to Kevin and Søren either through the live chat on YouTube, or you can email me at Amanda Moore, Moore, at povertylaw.org. Kevin, one of the things that you stress in your article is that organizations that receive funding from the Legal Services Corporation should not shy away from this type of media work. How can you be so confident about that?
We've tried it, and so far, Mark Friedman, who's on the on the webcast with us here has not yet launched an investigation of legal aid of Arkansas. So we're safe right now. Check back next week. No, I mean, the thing here is you've got to be really disciplined, okay? And this is kind of part of building in that culture that Søren was talking about earlier, is it's something that you can definitely do and you should do, right? You just want to make sure that you're careful when you do it, especially when the risks are higher if you receive LSC funds. So you've got to master the LSC regulations. And really, you're probably only going to have a couple people in your organization that have done that or want to do that. And so that means referring to the regulations all the time. That means referring to the advisory opinion letters. We tried to lay some of them out in our article to get a good sense of what is and isn't possible. I will say this, if you analyze the regulations, you notice that they are not intent-based. And this is actually very liberating in a way, is it's not what you're intending to do as a program, it's what you're actually doing, right? And so there's kind of that bright line test that you can go up to and know that as long as you're not crossing that with the prohibited action, you'll be okay. So master the LSC regulations. If there is something questionable, make sure you're justifying it internally and playing back and forth the risks beyond just yourself, and certainly with the person who's probably the executive director who's got to ultimately make the call. See if there's sometimes, if you think it's a risky strategy, see if there's a less risky strategy that's going to accomplish more or less the same thing. And, if needed, you can contact NLADA for advice about it. And then you can always contact LSC for advice about it too. So I think there's a lot in there that allows the freedom to do things. Clear things you can't say, right? And you need to learn what those are. If there's a policy in place, like if there is, rule X or statute Y that's actively under consideration now, you need to be really careful. If there's something else that's just vaguer, more general, there ends up being more freedom to maneuver there. So I don't know, it's hard to opine without a specific factual situation in front of me, but there is a ton of wiggle room, and we've been able to do it with, or take advantage of that wiggle room with a lot of dedicated study of what's permissible.
And I'll note that in Kevin and Søren's article, they do cite to a lot of the regs. If you need a refresher on where they are, what they say, those are cited in their article. Søren, different organizations have wildly different capacities for doing this type of work. What should advocates do if their organizations don't have dedicated staff for media work? And this is going to fall on the advocates themselves. Do you have tips for how they should handle that?
Yeah, certainly. And let me start by saying all the work on the LSC regulations are, of course, the wonderful work of Kevin. I don't know anything about it. Also, he should certainly bear the responsibility if something goes wrong there. It is so it's goes back to what he started, is having a culture of media individually, at least if not through the organization. There are a couple of steps where you will be hamstrung, if not have a bigger burden to have if you don't have somebody who's dedicated to communications or media, or if you don't have an executive director who finds the value to it. But if you want to do something, there's no reason why you can't do it on your own or take initiative to do it. And again, it starts with a clear media policy, or just having sort of a understanding and agreement from the start in the organizations that, if push comes to shove, you can go back and kind of cite to say, yeah, I know that we ended up in this place where we're taking a bit of a bit of heat here, but we agreed to this in the beginning, so let's stay the course. It's just creating small processes of, how do you share knowledge? How do you share resources across the organization? We've had a couple of organizations where, I asked one attorney, do you have, who do you have of relationships with reporters? And that attorney then said, well, I'm not sure we really do have that within the organization, where, he came back to me a couple of days later. Oh, of course. Yeah. Our, X, Y, and Z attorney knows, basically half of the staff on various local media outlets. So there's a lot of resources already there that is available. And again, to shamelessly plug what we're doing here, we're a free service that's put in the world to combat that exact situations where if you don't have that dedicated staff but still want to engage with the media, that's sort of what we're supposed to do on your behalf. And not only, with, our interest is your interest and what you're interested in. So you're not getting a PR company who, also has a secondary concern about whether, their name is getting out there, potentially finding new clients or making sure to land the most prominent outlet that may not necessarily overlap with what you're trying to achieve or who you're trying to reach. So it's you can go a long way with doing some legwork internally before you even start reaching out externally.
I'll note that our time is drawing close to a close. So if viewers have questions, please go ahead and send those now. You can use the live chat on YouTube or email me, Amanda Moore, MOORE, @povertylaw.org. One of the things that you all mentioned that was in your comments was this idea that because of social media, advocates aren't really tied to having a middle person that their message has to go through, which I think may give more leeway to make sure that, as Kevin pointed out, you are strategic. The client is at the center of this. Kevin, the example that you gave of what you all did in Arkansas, you really took advantage of this, of being able to control the message yourself. Can you talk about, give some of the examples of what you did, some of the channels that you used to put those client stories into the world?
Sure. And just for context, the reason we invested this level of time, effort, everything else is because this was an issue of huge concern for our client community. It wasn't just a couple folks. We went from basically having 0 cases of this type to, in the last, 24 months, 200 or so. Probably 100 of which came in around the time we started considering being more strategic about media. So this was a big investment because it matters to our clients. So what we did is we actually hired professional quality video production for a very modest sum to make videos of some of our clients whose situations reflected a lot of the really pressing issues with the algorithm cuts. And so we talked with our various clients about who would be comfortable. We thought about this different characteristics that would hopefully be universal. And then we actually produced the videos. It was a couple days of my time and the video producer's time to do all the filming and the interviewing and all the setup. And then it was a lot of time editing to get all this amazing material, right? Somebody's incredible life story down to something that's 3 or 4 minutes. Made those videos, put them online, on Facebook, boosted them. Again, very modest sums, and got amazing results. So one of our videos, I think it was close to 20,000 views. Another got 10,000 views. Another got 6,000 views. And in Arkansas, we're a pretty small state. So that was great. And it was a way for clients to be able to speak for themselves and speak for others who are in similar situations. And that also had the effect of giving other people affected or interested in the issue something that they could share. It gave reporters something that they could reference and see that this would be a compelling story and that these are clients who are good at telling their story, and all sorts of other good things that came from that. And so our executive director, Lee Richardson, really took kind of a very proactive approach to that and was willing to invest enough money to get it done, but it wasn't so much that it would raise any real red flags.
Well, thank you. And we had a question come in from Diana that ties to this. She says, given the decline in newspaper readership and traditional media, what are the best media sources to get the bang for your buck as far as getting the client sources out? And I wonder if what you're describing here may be just that.
Yeah, and Søren has always been very good about coaching me to think of the audience, right? Who are you trying to reach? And then from there, focus on where you're going to spend your money. So if your goal is to reach clients, how can you reach them? And, one way is those clients who are on social media. But then another way is for those clients who aren't on social media or aren't online as much, is getting to people who talk with them. So that's another reason to use this in a way that maybe going out and knocking on doors or doing outreach sessions or other things could be a lot less efficient in terms of getting to the maximum number of people. And then if you're interested in talking more broadly to the public about an issue, then traditional media makes a lot of sense and is pretty low cost apart from the time of whoever is working with the reporter and working on the story.
Diana commented exactly. So thanks for answering her question. And I will wrap up with a comment that we received from Jim in Michigan. And basically, he's going back to one of my initial questions about whether this is exploitative, and basically says that as long as there's due care in telling a client's story within the confines of LSC guidelines, can't see how whatever happens can be any more exploitative than what a client is already contending with. That's the real exploitation, is the injustice. And whatever exploitation, if someone construes it in a strange way or manipulates it, hopefully that's minimum. But if it leads to positive change that affects many others, then could this be seen as a win-win?
Yeah, and I mean, that's the amazing thing about all this is, like, our clients found solidarity in the storytelling and started seeing themselves as advocates in a way that I don't think they would have seen themselves when they first came to us, right? When they first came to us, it was a legal issue that needed help. They needed help with. And by the time they haven't left us, right? We're still fighting this fight. But now I think a lot of folks would see themselves as advocates and standing up for not only themselves, but for all the other people who haven't come to us or who can't speak as well, or who, for whatever reason, haven't participated. And that's a powerful transformation. And there's no way that that would have happened without kind of the intentional media strategy that we used there. So we weren't just the do-gooder helping the person who needs the help, right? We were actually trying to fulfill that ideal of being partners in advocacy and helping people be able to advocate for themselves in ways that we couldn't advocate for them.
Thank you. Well, our time has drawn to a close. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Kevin and Søren, for being with us today. It was a very interesting conversation. I'll remind everyone that for more on this, you will get a follow-up email that has the recording. It will also have contact information for Kevin and Søren, and I'll remind you can also read their article, which has a lot more on this. It's called Narrating Justice, Client-Centered Media Advocacy, and it's at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. If you enjoyed today's program, please join our mailing list. You'll be notified of future programs and publications. You can join at connect.povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. And I'll remind you that the Advocacy Exchange is also available as a podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, or SoundCloud. I would also like to invite all of you to join us for next month's Advocacy Exchange. We'll talk about an extremely creative idea for fighting wage theft using the automatic location tracker on a worker's cell phone. My guests will be Michael Hollander and Nate Vogel of Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. That conversation will take place on Friday, September 7th, same time as today, 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific. And the link to register for that will be in that follow-up email that you'll receive in the next couple of days. And we hope that you will join us next month. And until then, remember that you're not alone out there. Thank you.